First order of business is approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval of the minutes of the last meeting.
Been moved by Alderman Roth, seconded by Alderman Weigel. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Next item on the agenda is a presentation from the Gensler Group on the City of West Allis Highway 100 corridor plan. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to them, and they can make your presentation.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to present the vision for Highway 100. My name is Allis. I'm principal in charge of planning and design for Gensler. Gentleman who just handed me the mic is Steve Wilson, who's our design manager and also senior urban designer on the effort. Wes LeBlanc, who's our principal in charge of analytics. And also we're joined by Alice Davis, who's our senior analytics expert, if you will. You'll be hearing from myself and the entire team for the duration of the next 25 minutes. We'd like to take you not only through our process, but the vision for the master plan itself. So this is concluding the better part of a 6-month study, if you will, focused on the corridor itself. And the purpose is to create a long-term vision for the corridor, if you will. And Steve is going to talk about a few slides, talk about the evolution of the corridor and the site. I do want to emphasize that this is a long-term vision. We know it takes time for development to happen and to occur. So we've kind of broken it out into different stages, if you will, of how the sites and how the corridor could evolve over time. The study area, most of you know it, focused on the corridor itself, going north to I-94, going east, if you will, to I-41, south to Morgan Street, and then west to 111th. That's the study area that we were focused on. We did have a pretty intense series of stakeholder meetings, if you will, at the beginning of this effort to get a better understanding of the corridor, some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities. We had 6 separate stakeholder meetings. With that, we had 2, if you will, at-large community meetings, if you will, and then also an online survey, which we have to say we were very pleasant with the response that we actually did get from the larger public, you as well here in the audience. And it really served as a basis, if you will, our foundation for us to create the plan that you will see here presented tonight.
So it's interesting when you think about the West Allis corridor. This is not a typical planned commercial corridor. This is an area that's been developing in this city for the past 100 years. And the development really took off about 20 years after the city was incorporated. It started as a neighborhood, it then evolved into kind of an industrial area, and then it evolved into a retail area. And so it's got a complex pattern that developed over this time. Now, where we're at today and the reason we're undertaking this study is that the corridor, as it has in the past, is in need of repositioning. And there are some persistent vacancies, some large noticeable vacancies among many areas in the corridor and other areas that are generally underutilized. And so this strategy is to help the city reposition this corridor so it can have a great future moving forward. You can see that pattern of history when you look at the land uses today. There's stamps today of patterns of some of the original neighborhoods that were founded almost 100 years ago. There's patterns of industry, there's patterns of retail. And our strategy for the land use follows the same strategy outlined by the 2030 plan. It builds on that strategy, which is to build a kind of a uniformity and a constant retail presence along the corridor. But what we're suggesting is, and we'll learn more about this in a moment, the face of retail is changing. So we need to develop in a way that's flexible, that activates the corridor without depending just on retail or building more retail. So we want to create clusters of walkable development, and that these clusters will create destinations that will make people want to stay longer and come more frequently to visit the corridor. The other thing we need to acknowledge is Highway 100 itself is basically at capacity in terms of volume of traffic. And there have been studies in the past that had looked at widening the road, and we're recommending that we go with the city strategy to not widen the road, to instead look for strategies to mitigate that, mitigate the traffic congestion by looking for alternative means of transportation, and focus on capturing more trips, more people stopping at the stores along the way, rather than encouraging people to drive by. So that's the key strategy. Rather than widening the road, is creating more destinations that make people want to stop and stay on the corridor.
So I'm just going to go over pretty quickly some of the market analysis that we did that helps to kind of form the backbone of some of the planning and urban design that you'll see at the end of this presentation. We start our process typically with a demographic and economic analysis. So we look at what are the households, what are the trends for the overall Milwaukee metro area, West Allis as a city, but also our closer in study area and the 5 Mile area. Looking at this information helps us to understand what are the opportunities for development on this site. So basically overall, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the general trend of fairly flat population and household growth, but beyond West Allis and beyond the study area, there is some growth happening in the metro, and we think that we really have the opportunity to capture some of that on this site if developed correctly. We also identified what we call target household users. So who are the households that are living in this area and what are their characters? So it's a pretty diverse neighborhood and study area. There's everyone from middle-aged Gen Xers with kids to some growing population of young professionals to some lower income families, and kind of trying to figure out how do all these people have a role to play in terms of shopping and living in this study area. And then we also look at broader economic trends such as the macro employment. So healthcare and social services are two areas where we really see a lot of growth in this metro and a potential to look at in terms of helping us understand what could potentially go here in terms of both office development or also things like senior housing as we see the population continue to age and healthcare continue to rise. So I'll take a walk through some of the major real estate uses that we looked at, one of which is office. So looking at the broader office market in both the direct study area, but also a little bit further beyond that in the 5 Mile area, what we see is a really strong trend of the nearby area is starting to catch up with the farther out market area, which means that there's a lot less vacancy that there used to be. So there's that indicates to us that there's a need for new supply. And looking at, this photo is an existing building, looking at the existing product in the market, there really hasn't been a lot of new construction. And we think that with new construction, there would be demand, some latent demand that maybe people aren't raising their hand to say that they want to locate here because they don't know that there's new construction. And then flex industrial is a product type that we see a little bit of here already. It is very strong in this market, and it's the idea that industrial doesn't have to be sort of the ugly or the self-storage only type of products, but it can also be more advanced manufacturing, slightly shared with logistics or administrative. It doesn't have this is a fairly good example of a mill workshop that's about 200,000 square feet that also has a lot of job opportunity, and just kind of looking at how could this be in the corridor still, but where could it be located? And our design team will get into kind of thinking about the further back from Highway 100 facing parcels where this might be a good opportunity. And then multifamily development isn't something that we're really seeing in the corridor right now. There are a couple projects currently under construction in West Allis, but overall, the market is very, very strong for this product, and it continues to show demand. We think that there is opportunity for some differentiated products in this market, such as senior housing and some market rate housing if positioned well. We really think that kind of positioning this area as a live, work, play destination could work in the specific development sites that we'll outline. And then last but not least, retail and food and beverage, which, this is a retail corridor. It's a historic retail corridor. So kind of looking at what's there and what makes up the current retail. And we see that as sort of a mix of big box stores like your Kohl's, your Menards and those like larger stores, some of which are experiencing large vacancies. You also have inline retail, which are, you know, the strip centers that have a bunch of stores, and then you also have some new construction on off-site pad sites. And we see that the rental rates for those are very different, which also shows us that there is potential for demand. So if a Starbucks that's a new construction is getting 4 times the rent of an existing older building, then that indicates that retailers are willing to locate here and willing to put their money on West Allis. It just might not be that we have the right real estate available for them. And one of the big challenges we also see with that is connectivity and the lack of access, which our design team will get into as well. So helping solve the, you know, how do you just not let people fly by down Highway 100 without turning in or without having a destination, and sort of creating that as part of the development sites. And also thinking about retail in the broader context. Like Steve said, the nature of retail really is changing. So how can we not add more retail square footage to the corridor, not overbuild it and then create more vacancy, but sort of use the same amount of square feet that might exist and change it and think about it differently. In the context of where we are, you know, you have Mayfair Collection and Mayfair Mall to the north. You have, you know, downtown Milwaukee due east, and you also have Brookfield Square. And all of those places aren't gonna, you know, suddenly stop doing really well overnight. So how can we position ourselves to basically have retail that will help the community and help foster local shopping? And a lot of that also falls into the entertainment and the dining and the food and beverage areas as well, which are can pretty much survive without a regional destination.
So we've taken the feedback we got from the stakeholder meetings, the feedback that we got in the 2 community meetings, lots of conversations with Patrick and John and their team, and took that and coupled it with the work that Wes and Allis have done from a market standpoint to start to create a vision, if you will. And again, we know this is a very long corridor, but as far as where we think the most impact could be as far as developing a long-range plan, we actually focused on these 2 sites, if you will. So this is Highway 100. So the first opportunity site that we looked at was on the northern end of the corridor, just south of 94, if you will, on the east side of Highway 100. And the second opportunity site that we looked at was on the southwest corner of Highway 100 and Greenfield. So we'll talk to you about how we actually envision, if you will, a larger vision and a strategy for development for these 2 sites. The first is looking at, again, just south of 94 on the east side, where we introduced, if you will, 4 different development types, combining office and commercial, along with retail, food and beverage, also light industry and flex industrial uses as well. We think we can actually do about 200, just under 200,000 square feet of development mixing in these uses. And we also wanted to point out that there's still a larger opportunity, we think, if you will, with the Colder site on the other side of Highway 100. So the vision, at least for this parcel, if you will, coupled with what could be happening in the future for Colders, we really think could create a new gateway and kind of a new, if you will, entry point, and also start to evolve the image and build on the image of West Allis as people come in from the north into the corridor. So we really wanted to focus on this building, if you will, and this gateway entry, and think about ways that we can actually reposition, if you will, some of the building stock that you do have here. So our thinking is that if we could actually carve out, and if I could just go back to the previous slide, you can see where we actually carved out the building to create a new destination, a new place, if you will, for people to gather. As Steve talked about, and this is your community, you know it better than us, Highway 100 is a fast-moving corridor, and it's a place where people go through. We wanted to find places where people can actually come to on the corridor as opposed to going through. So we really think this idea of having what could be a new brewery, if you will, a beer hall, if you will, could be that new social gathering spot, not only for the city of West Allis, but that actually could draw people in. So again, kind of carving into this building, if you will, and creating, if you will, that new destination, that new place where people can come gather. You can actually have festivals here. This is not at all to take away from the other strengths that you have going on here at West Allis, but it offers another place, if you will, to kind of people to come and create a new sense of place here on the corridor.
Our second site is at Highway 100 and Greenfield Avenue. We thought this site was an important opportunity because there's the large vacancy to the north, but also because not everything has to happen on the Highway 100 corridor. All the cross streets are also opportunities for redevelopment. And it's important when we point these out also, none of this site is an example. It may manifest itself in other locations, but we want to show what a cluster of development could do. And again, this could be market supported over the next 10-year time horizon, supporting an office building, for instance, multifamily residential above retail, clustered around a square. And what this would allow you to accomplish would be, you can see the before, and then in the after. In the first phase, you could develop this green that would be a great kind of public square, activated, and completely transform the face of Greenfield Avenue. And over time, as this type of development catches on, you could imagine that pattern expanding into other areas. So this is really a plan for today and a plan for tomorrow. Long term, this whole area could gradually transform into something that's a lot more walkable and a lot more mixed. So we're looking for an environment that takes this very auto-oriented view into one that's much more of mixed and active pedestrian environment. And again, it doesn't have to be the whole corridor. There can be pockets of activity, but it gives people a reason to come and visit multiple destinations without getting in and out of their car. So building on that, so the future of mobility, we talked before about the plan is not to widen Highway 100. What we can do instead is look for, if you can see here in blue, all these parallel alternative paths that can be bikeways, vehicular routes, that take some of the pressure off the Highway 100 corridor. And we're also looking at ways to create a multi-use path that runs along Highway 100, so you don't only have to depend on your car to get from one place to another. Another layer of this, and one that we can accomplish probably the most quickly, would be branding and placemaking through simple things like adding street lights and street trees. You can begin to immediately change that. And you can imagine adding to this banners and other elements of sort of logos that kind of announce that you are in West Allis, so people know they've arrived in a special place. And you can see here the multi-use path that runs alongside. And there's ways also to manifest this in taking, there's a proposal for a pedestrian bridge that would be right by the rail bridge that would connect the bike trail. And then you have a signature element here that creates, again, something grand, something noticeable. You know, our feeling is on Highway 100, you have to be bold, you have to do something that's going to be noticed, and this is something where people would say, hey, I've arrived, I'm in West Allis, I'm in the heart of West Allis. And even simple things like painting the water tower with the city colors would be another way, again, for people to notice things that maybe in the everyday they just don't pay attention to, but this is something that can really announce pride of place. So finally, I'm going to wrap up with implementation, and there's a lot more information in the report where we break this out in great detail, and I'll just touch on these 6 that we again address in more detail. One is addressing the underutilized and recent vacancies, updating the zoning, creating a framework or for favorable financial drivers, improving mobility, branding and placemaking, which I just mentioned, and finally continuing with the stakeholder communication and collaboration. And as part of our appendix, we have, as a separate cover, this implementation tracker that identifies responsibilities, cost, sort of the order of magnitude cost, complexity, so that we can map out and track all the various action items and how they can be accomplished. And with that, we'll close. Thank you very much for your attention. We're happy to take questions.
Mr. President, I have a question.
I just would like to let the people know that the
Okay.
council and the committees and staff are going to be spending a lot of time on this during this next year. So if there's any questions first from the alderpersons, Alderman Vitale?
Yes. Yeah, I would like to, I do appreciate the time you people came down, and explained all the details about the retailing portion of the light industrial. How many sites did you, through your study, you really dedicate your time and find how many light industrial we could have within the corridor of the Highway 100? I mean, how many little site could be accommodated with light industrial? Retail, we need them, but the fact is, you have to have people come into the community for a reason. There's got to be a reason to come to our community. Retailing is great, but I know retailing is suffering right now in many sectors of our cities or communities.
Yeah, so let me see if I can sharpen the question or make sure I understand it correctly. So we're talking about how much light industrial demand we think there is broadly?
Yes.
And then where site specifically might we recommend that
Yes.
within the corridor? Okay.
Yes.
Light industrial, flex manufacturing, sometimes it's referred to, has a very strong demand here. In fact, is a product category across the country and throughout this region that's performing very strongly. When we're talking about public realm, so, and this is where I defer to some of our friends on the planning side as well, we actually looked at the whole corridor. We thought about the areas where you could start to choose initial projects that would start kind of a snowball effect of transformation, right? And when you look at the southern side of the corridor, you have a very different condition than the northern side. It's also the case that when you're looking at those types of uses, they're not very pedestrian friendly, and you usually want to pull them off of main corridors. And so that was, I believe, our recommendation as a planning team, was to focus on how you still accommodate that activity, but not in some of these areas where we're trying to create kind of a center of gravity for pedestrian and public realm. But I think we started with 7 or 8 sites throughout the whole area. We settled on 2 that we thought were near-term needs, and also from a market standpoint, very good candidates for transformation. You want to add to that?
Thank you, sir.
Does that help?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the alderpersons?
Mr. President,
Alderman May?
more of a comment. Eisenhower once said that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And when we take a look at this plan, I think there are elements in here that people are going to look at, and I even was watching the audience, and their eyes go, what? And I just want to let everyone know, these things you're seeing in here, it's a plan. It's supposed to help set a roadmap of where we may be going in the future. It's supposed to help get our creative juices going and help us move forward. The main reasons we decided to go and have a plan done are, we were looking at the land uses along Highway 100 and wondering, why is there manufacturing along a major commercial route? Would we want to see a concrete plant on Highway 100? That doesn't make any sense. But the other reason we did it is because I know Alderman Gary Barzak and myself, how many complaints and how tired are we of looking at vacant buildings and hearing of developers working on a deal and the deals fall apart consistently. And it seems to me that this corridor will need some help from the city. And I think this plan provides us a bit of a roadmap to get there. So again, it's more of a comment than a question, but I wanted everyone to understand the reasoning behind this is to help set the stage so that the future council can move forward and get some action on this corridor. Thanks.
Alderman May, to add to your comments, the city has been focused over the last couple of decades on revitalizing the east end of West Allis. And we have ignored the west end with the attitude that Highway 100 is always taking care of itself. There's always demand for property along Highway 100. the rents are high, and that has changed in the last few years with the major decline in retail activity in a number of areas. So that's why we can commission this study to assist us in honing our focus into certain areas and what we can do as a city to assist redeveloping the Highway 100 corridor, much as we did the east end of town, and I think you're seeing some very nice results on the east end of town. We want to make the same things happen on the west end. Any other questions or comments from the older people? If not, I'll open it up to the audience. Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? If not, yes. If you'd please step up to the mic or take that mic.
I was wondering if the speed of the traffic will be slowed down then, so that it would be more, pedestrian friendly. I live right near Coles, Menards area, Highway 100 and 109th Street there. And I know it's really hard for like the kids in the neighborhood even to cross the street to go to Oscars, to get across. Is that anything that you're talking about doing to make it more of a neighborhood friendly, that people would be, then they would be looking more at what's available?
Well, thank you for your question. That's certainly something that not only we studied, but I think when we kind of looked at these two opportunity sites, especially the ones that are not only fronting the Highway 100, but also Greenfield Avenue as well, we certainly expect that there will be ways that we can actually, or at least the city can actually move forward in trying to calm traffic, if you will, to not only allow for more pedestrian movement going across, but also allow for people to actually be on Highway 100, sit, have coffee, have a breakfast or whatnot at a cafe. So because we want people to be there on a corridor, and it's a little challenging when you have fast-moving traffic. But I think to the councilman's point, this is part of a roadmap, if you will, of how you actually want the corridor to evolve. And I think further study needs to be done, if you will, to talk about how we slow some of that traffic down so it can be more friendly to pedestrians.
I'm not a planner, but I hang out with a lot of planners. I think an important conclusion maybe that was buried in some of this was Highway 100 is always going to be an important artery. That there are calming measures that can happen. There are a lot of ways, as Steve was talking about, where you can distribute traffic in different ways and create multiple opportunities for actually getting to a destination. But that to actually make Highway 100 work better, you were going to have to figure out some places along the route or along the corridor where you could step back, pull activity off, and have a different sense of place than being all the way up on the roadway. So that was an important kind of moment that we came to as a team, was trying to figure out how to choose those spots where you could actually accomplish that.
Any other questions?
My question is, what kind of interest have we gotten from developers? And if we are going to get interest, how are you going to market it?
Maybe Patrick from our development department is the appropriate person to answer that.
We currently are out there marketing the Highway 100 area. Our city has a great brand. Our image is very strong right now. There is interest in Highway 100. There's a new Mission Barbecue moving in. There's national franchises looking. A few of the properties that are for sale have some ownership challenges that prohibit quality type of repurposing or redevelopment, and we hope to work through those. I'll give you an example. I've probably made 12 different calls to Burger King trying to get them to respond. I got a response today. It takes time to get people to respond on these big corporations on sites. We want to promote sound development out there. There's 20,000 cars a day going by. But one of the things that I took back from hearing from the focus groups, and I think Gensler and their team, and thank you for the study, is that people are driving through. There are people in the focus groups that said, I look at Highway 100 as something I drive through, not to stop. And I think with the council's efforts and the mayor's efforts on branding our city, we want to create a place, a destination for people to stop. And we need to think big on Highway 100. The vision that Gensler has represented here on a corner right off the interstate as a gateway into our city and thinking that area differently will attract the attention of developers and other businesses. It's just going to take time. This didn't happen overnight, and the economy is changing relative to retail and the internet, and now we have to think of the next 50, 100 years. So.
Any other questions? Comments?
My interests are truly, purely south of yours. I represent Highway 100 in the city of Greenfield, so I appreciate you taking this on and trying to focus it, because my obstacle is the city has also spent a lot of time on the east side redeveloping and refocusing, and Highway 100 in Greenfield as well needs some attention to get some life, get some pockets, whatever, for people to stop at and spend money and enjoy our city. So I applaud your efforts, and I was happy to be here to absorb everything you have. That's all I got. No
Thank you.
questions. I gotta go to my meeting.
Anyone else have any comments? Mr. Slash is one of our directors of development. You have
Not
few
a
comments?
director yet, but I'm
So
community
one
development
of our-
manager.
One of our
Thank you.
directors, assistant director.
I just wanted to say thank you to the Common Council and the mayor and Gensler for preparing and recommending that we do a study of Highway 100. We will work with our planning team. We will work to market the study. And just last week, I kind of started sharing some images with brokers in the development community, and it opened their eyes, and they said, send me the copy of that report. I have some ideas. So I think it's going to create a lot of energy and buzz about the corridor. And the vision is something that's just not something tomorrow we're going to start, but it's the long-term plan that we can start coming up with some ideas relative to the branding and looking to make sure that Highway 100 is something of has a strong economic vitality for the future. It is definitely a regional destination. People know of Highway 100. Now, how do we take it to the next level? And thank you to Gensler and the Common Council for helping us support this study.
There's no other comments. I'd like to
Mr.
thank the
President?
Gensler Group
Thank
for
you.
their
Mr.
efforts.
President? I'm sorry. May I ask one more question? I wanted to wait till the audience was complete. One of the things I noticed in the earlier drafts of the study was there was some commentary on the amount of people who come from outside this corridor to work in the corridor, but how the number of people who live in the corridor, they don't work on the corridor, they go somewhere else. And so when we talk about traffic volumes and internal capture, how do we marry those two together so the people living in the corridor are working in the corridor as well?
I think a big part of that is also including the idea of multifamily housing as part of the development, and kind of the idea that there are a lot of jobs centered in the corridor and nearby, but there's not a lot of difference in what we call diversity of housing options. You know, there's a lot of kind of similar single-family home formats, and so kind of providing those options, and a lot of people are interested in those options if they were available to them. There's a high level of demand. And then coupled with that, that's why we've also included commercial office development or flex industrial development in both of the study sites, so that we can kind of get that live-work component as a site. So if you did want to live on site and work on site, that is something that isn't really available in West Allis unless it were to happen here.
Thank you, Tom.
Then if there's nothing else to come before the committee, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
President.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried.